Please stand if you would like for the reading of God's word. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, if you look for it as silver and search for it as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless. For he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Thus you will walk in the ways of the good and keep to the paths of the righteous. For the upright will live in the land, and the blameless will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the unfaithful torn from it. You may be seated.
All right, thank you, Nina. Good morning, Harvest Ridge. I want to ask, what lengths would you go? What would you be willing to risk? What sacrifices would you make in order to find or discover a treasure? All right, so throughout history, now there have been some incredible discoveries of treasures that we have found. So one of the most famous discoveries, of course, of all time was the discovery of King Tut's tomb in Egypt. That was back in 1922, so I'm sure we all remember where we were when we heard the news, right? Now occasionally, sometimes our discoveries are simply just by dumb luck. So one of the largest discoveries in America happened 12 years ago in California. It's called the Saddle Ridge Hoard. Anyone heard of this discovery? All right, so not a well-known thing. There's a lot of mystery surrounding this discovery. In fact, the couple, as far as I know, has remained anonymous and has never been identified publicly who made this discovery. So they were out apparently walking their dog on their land in California, and they came across an old rusted tin can. I think we have a picture here. At least according to Wikipedia, this is the picture of the can. So they were walking their dog, they came across this can, they dug it up, and inside was well-preserved coins, gold coins dating back to the 1800s, mid-1800s. Now, altogether, this discovery was estimated to be about $10 million. Over $10 million in that tin can. So that makes you think the next time you walk by an old tin can on the road. Now that was an accidental discovery, but many of our discoveries have come through great persistence and great effort on the part of the one who is searching. So in 1985, the treasure hunter Mel Fisher, he finally discovered what was the 1622 Spanish ship that sank off the coast of the Florida Keys that was full of gold. So Fisher had spent decades of his life researching and looking in order to find this Spanish ship. And he finally did, after decades of searching. Estimated cost or value of that ship and its gold was $450 million. There's also a field of treasure hunters looking for something valuable other than gold or silver. Something that's not gold or silver, but it's still very valuable, and that would be dinosaur bones. All right, so amateur hunters, they will ask landowners for permission to come search on their land under the agreement that if they find something, they will split the cost with the landowners. Once you find a dinosaur skeleton, then you can begin the long and difficult process of excavating its bones, which can take months or even years to accomplish. However, I would say the long and the arduous effort can be financially worth it. So in 1992, a nearly perfect skeleton of a T-Rex was discovered in South Dakota. The T-Rex is named Stan. It's the name of the T-Rex. And in 2020, Stan was sold at auction for $31.8 million. So just so if you are interested in T-Rex or treasure hunting through dinosaur bones. Now, if you happen to have $15,000, by the way, you can buy a mold replica of Stan's head, such as the one that is owned by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in his home. There's the Stan's head, a replica of it. Now, I'm not saying that that's worth the money, by the way, but I am suggesting instead of maybe decorating for Christmas next year, hanging of the greens, we could go a totally different route than that. Just give it some thought, that's all I'm saying. Now, there's also a different sort of treasure that people seek other than gold or other than dinosaur bones. There are people who seek after fame. Now, you might be familiar with some of the famous stories of early explorers, people like maybe Ernest Shackleton, who in 1915 was thought to be the first person to reach the South Pole, only to get stranded with 27 men in Antarctica for over a year. And somehow they all survived. Of course, there's the story of Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, the explorers who first climbed Mount Everest in 1953. Fame itself can be a sort of treasure that people seek after. Now, in most of these examples, we see people who go to extraordinary lengths. They spend months and years of their life seeking, training, preparing for what it is they hope to discover or find. Oftentimes, they sacrifice personally. They even risk financially, sometimes even risking their own lives in order to hopefully find or achieve something great, something valuable, and something of consequence. Now today, our passage, it tells us that we can find something great, something valuable, and something of consequence. And our passage encourages us to pursue wisdom as though it were itself treasure and silver and gold. So we're beginning now a short sermon series for the next month or so on the Book of Proverbs. Now this is going to be different from other sermon series we've done in the past, where we will go passage by passage, chapter by chapter. The Book of Proverbs is not really conducive for that style of preaching because it's not a story or a letter like other books of the Bible are. But instead, the Book of Proverbs is a collection of proverbs, hence the name. It's just consisting here of short statements giving some sort of general truth or advice to people. Now, for the next month or so, our plan is to look at several different proverbs and how they get used in the New Testament, how these proverbs are used by the New Testament authors. Now, today is going to be a little more of an introduction. I'm going to broadly explain what the book is about, and then we're going to focus on one key passage, Proverbs Chapter 2, and then finally at the end, I'm going to show some kind of connections to this notion of wisdom in the New Testament, and really how wisdom is seen most fully through Jesus Christ in the New Testament. So one quick note here. So the next month we're going to focus on the Book of Proverbs, and I want to encourage, before we get started, that just each of us, if you're not currently doing a Bible reading plan, I want to encourage you to read the Book of Proverbs this month. Okay, so there's 31 chapters in Proverbs. You read one chapter a day. It's pretty easy to do, and read a chapter a day, and in a month you will have completed this book. So I encourage everyone to continue doing that with us while we are preaching through this sermon series. Now that said, I want to jump now to the Book of Proverbs and kind of give a brief survey or overview of the book, and then we'll jump into our text. Now the first thing to note here is that Proverbs is attributed to King Solomon. Now Solomon, he was the son of King David. And both David and Solomon, these are Israel's most famous kings. And Solomon is said to be the wisest king to have ever lived. Now the Book of Proverbs is mostly a collection of various ancient proverbs. So a lot of them are kind of written as advice, as though from a father to his son, explaining to his son how to find success and happiness in life. So Proverbs, we should know, are just short sayings or statements that teach general truths about life. An important thing to note here is that these statements are seen as proverbial truths. In other words, they are generally true. And that's different from absolute truths. Okay, so absolute truths are guaranteed. They are absolutely always true. So for example, the statement that every year the Chiefs make the Super Bowl, that is a generally true statement. It's not an absolutely true statement because it might be possible one year the Chiefs don't make the Super Bowl. But in general, that's a true statement, a proverbial truth. Now we have Proverbs in America, so for example, we have the proverb, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Okay, so this is seen as a general or proverbial truth. Simply waking up early in the morning does not guarantee that you will be rich. If that were the case, I think every one of us would start waking up at 4 a.m. every day, and we would all be rolling in a lot of cash. But the idea is that in general, those who start their day early, as opposed to those who sleep in late, they tend to be more successful in life. That is a proverbial truth. Another proverb we have in America is the early bird catches the worm. Kind of a similar notion here, that it's better to wake up early each day, that you're going to be more productive, that you're going to achieve things by waking up early. Although I've heard it said, people follow up with another proverb after that and says, yeah, but it's the second mouse that catches the cheese, or gets the cheese. So you can choose whichever one. If you're a person who sleeps in late, you can choose that second proverb if you make you feel better about things. Now, at the heart of this book, though, the Book of Proverbs, the key theme or topic that the book is mostly about is the topic of wisdom. Now, wisdom is a word that has several different nuances or ideas, but most often when the Bible uses the word wisdom, it means something like right alignment with reality. It's the right alignment with truth, with reality. It's sort of this notion of wisdom. So wisdom is knowledge of the truth, it's knowing what is true, what is reality, but even more than that, it's aligning your life according to that truth and reality. So for example, the knowledgeable person might look at the tree that's leaning over their house and think, one day that tree could fall at any day now and crush the roof of my house. So that would be the knowledgeable person who sees that and knows that. The wise person then is one who cuts down that tree before it falls. Okay, so it's not just knowing what is true, what is reality, what is possible, but it's acting accordingly to it. Their life is aligned with reality. So wisdom is knowing the truth and aligning your life accordingly. And often this is just sort of smart, common sense stuff. Things that, based on our experience or our knowledge of the world, those who wake up early, they really do tend to be more successful than those who sleep in late each day. Or being a kind, thoughtful person means that you're going to have more friends in life than if you are backstabbing, slanderous, and insulting. Okay, so you see this kind of teachings throughout the book of Proverbs. And here wisdom is just sort of the art of succeeding in life. It's the art of succeeding in life. But another thing about this book, though, is that one of the key aspects of true wisdom is the knowledge of God. That his reality and his involvement in this world is important and it matters. And aligning your life then in view of God's existence and God's reality is therefore important for us. The wise person is one who aligns themselves to the existence and the reality of God, whereas it is the fool then who rejects the truth of God in this world. As Psalm 14:1 says, the fool is the one who says in his heart, there is no God. And so biblical wisdom is aligning your life not only to the realities and truths of this world, but more important is aligning one's life to the reality and the truth of God. That God is involved in this world. God is active in this world. And so we align our lives both to the created world and to the creator. It is knowing then, what is God's will for people? How does God expect people to live and to act? And what is God's direction and plan for this world? Where is the world headed? Is some of these questions. And knowing these things then and aligning our lives in light of these questions, this is biblical wisdom. In fact, kind of the thesis statement of the book of Proverbs is found in Proverbs Chapter 1, verse 7. Kind of a summary, I think, of the entire book. And it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And fear here, just to clarify, it doesn't mean like being terrified or scared as though you want to hide from God, but rather fear here is a healthy reverence or respect for God. In a similar way, if you were to try to climb Mount Everest, there should be a healthy respect you have for that mountain. You don't just flippantly show up one day wearing sandals and shorts and a t-shirt. But if you're trying to climb the mountain, you're going to have a good deal of reverence and respect so that you approach the mountain with great seriousness. And I would say similar here is our fear of our approach for God. So this is a summary then of the Book of Proverbs. It's a book largely about wisdom. And this introduction then leads to our passage this morning, where we see the source of wisdom and how we are to obtain it. The source of wisdom and how we are to obtain it. So this chapter is kind of key to the entire book. And so with that said, I want to turn now to Proverbs Chapter 2. And we'll read verses 1 to 10. And here, like I said before, that these are words of wisdom. They're written as though from a father to a son, trying to help the son find success and happiness in life, and to help his son to live a life of meaning, a life of consequence. And so this chapter here is going to be set up as conditional statements. So conditional meaning if, then. If you do this, then that will happen. Okay, so that's conditional statements. So let's start reading now, starting in verse 1 again of our passage. It says, my son, and then here's the very first conditional. If you accept my words and stir up my commands within you, the idea of like memorizing, of holding on tightly to these words. Verse 2, turning your ear from wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, here's another if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding. This picture here is the idea of calling out, crying aloud. This is the picture of someone desperately seeking, desperately searching for something. Verse 4, and here's a third if you look for it as though for silver, a precious metal, a valuable metal, and you search for it as for hidden treasure. So how much would you search for a hidden treasure? That's how we should search for wisdom. Then verse 5, here's the result then. If we do those things, then here's the result. Then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. And here's the reason we will find wisdom, find fear of the Lord, find knowledge. Verse 6, for the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. So in other words, wisdom here is the ability to see that God cares for his people. God is concerned for his people. And by implication there, it is the fool then who thinks that God is indifferent. It is the fool who thinks that God is uninvolved in this world. And then verse 9, here's another result for those who seek wisdom. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair. Every good path. A good path is the path that leads to good. Every good path, verse 10, for wisdom will enter your heart and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Now, a couple comments here on this passage. So first of all, this whole text, it rests on the enormous ifs at the beginning. If you seek wisdom, you will find God, you will find success. And the implication here is that if you don't seek wisdom, then you won't find God or success. And this text then is forcing us, the readers, into a decision. What choices are we going to make? Are we going to pursue wisdom as though it is a treasure, or are we not? But the text is telling us then the result of our decision. So it's all resting on this if at the beginning. But secondly, we see that this is not just that we are to search for wisdom apathetically or indifferently or half-heartedly, but rather we are to search for wisdom fervently, as though we are desperate for it, as though wisdom is an earthly treasure of gold or silver. And this shows us then the great value, the great worth that wisdom has for people. Third here is that it is important to note that wisdom of God is not discovered simply because we are smart enough, because we tried hard enough, because we worked hard enough, because we knew where to look in that way, but rather wisdom is given by God. Okay, so God gives wisdom to those who seek him for it. In other words, wisdom is found by trusting in God as the source of wisdom. So in fact, look one more time at verse 6 here. And it says, you will find wisdom, for the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. And so wisdom, it comes through God. And keep this in mind because it's important to what we're about to see in the New Testament. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of chapter 2, but I want to kind of briefly summarize. The chapter, it goes on to describe how wisdom will protect you from the ways of evil and wicked people. Wisdom will guard you. It'll prevent you from falling and from stumbling. It'll prevent these major downfalls in your life. If you live with wisdom, you'll be protected from these things. And again, I think we recognize here the proverbial truth in that. In English, we have the idiom that one bad apple spoils the bunch. The book of 1 Corinthians says that bad company corrupts good character. It's a similar notion here, is that wisdom, it will protect you and it'll guard your life as you live it. So the final thing I want to do now, it's kind of a chapter 2. The final thing I want to do is to turn now to a few passages in the New Testament that speak on wisdom. And what I want to show here is that it is Jesus Christ and specifically his suffering on the cross that reveals to us the wisdom, the truth of God in this world. So the first passage I want to turn to is Matthew 12, verse 42. This is Jesus' rebuke here of his generation because they have these hard hearts towards him. They're not willing to listen to Jesus. And so Jesus says to them, he says, the queen of the south. Now, stop for a second. Queen of the south, this is Jesus recalling a story now from the Old Testament. So you have to kind of know a little bit of the Old Testament. Queen of the south, this is the Queen of Sheba. And the Queen of Sheba goes to King Solomon because she heard about the wisdom of Solomon. And she had to see for herself. She had to check it out for herself, this wisdom of Solomon. So the queen travels from a great distance just to hear about this wisdom, to see this wisdom of Solomon. Remember, Solomon here is the author of Proverbs. So Jesus here, he's saying, the queen of the south will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's words, or Solomon's wisdom. And now, get this, something greater than Solomon is here. Okay, so notice here what Jesus is saying. Jesus mentions Solomon, the wisest of all kings, the author of our book of Proverbs. So wise, in fact, that monarchs, other kings and queens are traveling from the ends of the earth just to hear his wisdom. And Jesus is saying someone even greater is here now. And he's talking here about himself. And the implication is that Jesus is saying, if that is how other kings and queens responded to the wisdom of Solomon, then how much more should you have listened to my words? How much more should you have listened to me? Like, you're not even kings and queens. You're not even coming from a great distance. And yet, someone greater than Solomon is here. And so we see here something that Jesus is revealing to us something great, something true, something real about God in this world. That Jesus is revealing wisdom in a way that even Solomon did not reveal it. Now, the second passage I want to bring up then is Colossians chapter 2. And here we see that Paul also points to Jesus as the fullness of wisdom, by which we can now understand the mystery of God. So look at verses 2 to 3. Paul says, my goal is that they may be encouraged in heart and united in love, so that they may have the full riches of complete understanding. So remember Proverbs 2, where understanding it comes from God, and for those who seek it. They may have the full riches of complete understanding, in order that they may know the mystery of God. Namely, the mystery is Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So Christ then reveals the wisdom and the knowledge of God. And this wisdom and knowledge of God is a treasure for us. The scholar N.T. Wright, he says, everything we might want to ask about God and his purposes can and must now be answered with reference to the crucified and risen Jesus. Wright goes on to say that Paul uses these terms like riches and treasures in order to invite his readers to seek and to explore it with eagerness. And so Paul's using words like treasures because he's encouraging us to pursue this wisdom revealed through Jesus Christ the Son of God. And so do you seek to find and discover a treasure greater than silver and gold? And if you do, then seek the reality and the truth of Jesus and align your life according to him. This is a treasure of infinite value and worth. Now, how exactly is divine wisdom found in and through Jesus Christ? And here I want to take us now to our final passage this morning. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians 1. And specifically, I'm going to read verses 22 to 25 and then drop down to verse 30. It says, Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Greeks. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. And then drop down to verse 30. It is because of him, God, that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. So here in this passage, we see that human wisdom alone does not make it possible for us to see and to believe the gospel, the good news of what God is doing in this world. Human wisdom alone does not take us there. In fact, the cross of Jesus and the idea they crucified Lord and King, that is complete and utter foolishness in the eyes of the world. What kind of king willingly dies on a Roman cross? That does not make sense to the world's eyes. But yet, this is the wisdom of God for us. And it is how God has chosen to enact righteousness, holiness, and redemption in this world. So to summarize then the New Testament passages, and kind of in conclusion here, we see that Jesus Christ is God's wisdom, that he reveals a truth and the reality of God. And he reveals God's will and his desire for people and God's actions on behalf of humanity. And now we know God more truly and more purely when we see Jesus Christ. And specifically, when we look to Jesus Christ on the cross. That it is the cross that we see how God redeems this world. That it isn't up to us ourselves getting us out of our own mess or our own muck. It isn't because of how wonderful or how special we are that God just couldn't make it without us. But rather it is because of God's incredible love and mercy that even though we are rebellious and hard-hearted, God sent Jesus to be our righteousness, our holiness, and our redemption. And this feels like foolishness in the eyes of the world. The idea of a crucified Messiah does not make sense. But yet it is precisely how God has chosen to act in this world. And so Jesus is the wisdom of God. So you look back then at Proverbs Chapter 2, and it's a conditional statement. If you pursue wisdom, if you seek it as though it is a treasure of silver and gold, then God will give us wisdom. And in the New Testament, we see that wisdom is seen in Jesus Christ on the cross. And this means then that if we want a treasure greater than gold, if we want to live a life of consequence, a life of meaning, and a life of eternal value, if we want to find and discover something great, then we pursue after Christ. We dedicate our lives to knowing him and the meaning of his crucifixion for us. And so seek Christ to know and to understand God's will for this world, to know his love for all people. We seek Christ to know, or to have our hearts transformed so that our hearts align with his heart and that our life is aligned with the path that leads to eternal life. So we discover this truth by looking to Christ and Christ crucified. And so let us then be a people who pursue Christ above all things, above all the treasures of this world, above all of its fame and fortune, above all of its comforts, luxuries, or entertainments. Let us pursue Christ. And God has promised that those who seek him will find him. Please pray with me. God, we are grateful, Lord, that we have seen your wisdom through Christ. God, that you've opened our eyes, that you've allowed us to understand that the cross is not the foolishness that many suppose. But God, that through that, you have redeemed this world, that you are redeeming this world, that you are transforming this earth for good and for your glory. And I pray, God, that we would cherish this message and that we would meditate on this message, that we would store it up in our hearts, that it would transform us, that it would shape the way that we see this world, that we would see our own lives in this world, and that we would see those around us. So God, I pray for your help, your Spirit to be working in us and moving us and teaching us, that we might seek and pursue after you as our source of wisdom. And God, we pray this for the good of all people, for the glory of